The smell of formaldehyde and old coffee usually calmed me. It smelled like answers. But that day, the usual comfort felt thin. I tapped my pen against the lab bench, squinting through the microscope. Under the cold glare of the lamp, the fern frond looked almost alien. I'd measured it last week, carefully. A specific length etched into my memory, logged in the system. Now it was nearly double. Double. Damn it, I mumbled, leaning closer. I adjusted the focus, the tiny gears whirring faintly. No, the numbers weren't wrong. My vision wasn't blurry. This frond, a mundane species, had grown at an unprecedented rate. I let out a short, hollow laugh. Must have smeared the data again, I told myself, shaking my head. It had to be. My own sloppy data. Or maybe the light had warped my perception. Yeah, that was it. Just my usual fatigue playing tricks. Later that evening, I walked into my perfectly tidy kitchen. The electric kettle on the stove was still warm. A thin wisp of steam, barely visible, curled from the spout. I touched it. It was hot. I distinctly remembered cleaning the kitchen before leaving for the lab, the kettle cold and empty. I twisted the knob, hearing the familiar click-click of the temperature setting. "That's odd," I murmured aloud, though no one was there to hear. "I don't recall boiling water this morning." I brushed it off. A tiny lapse. Happens, right? Too much work, too many late nights staring at cell structures. My mind was probably just a sieve these days. A few days later, the doubts were starting to fester instead of fade. I was hunched over my desk, trying to compile a report, trying to convince myself what I was seeing in the lab slides was just an error. Then my phone buzzed. It was a video message from Mark, an old colleague. Mark, who used to joke about me being married to my petri dishes. He appeared on the screen, the static making his face slightly jumpy. He was in the middle of a forest I knew well, a hiking trail we'd often surveyed together. Behind him, a maple tree, an old faithful, now looked wrong. Its roots, usually a solid anchor, seemed to have bulged, thickening, pushing up the forest floor around it in grotesque, swollen forms. His voice, when it came through, was strained, almost breathless. "Evie, can you believe this?" he asked, his eyes wide. He pointed a trembling hand at the base of the maple. "This trunk, it was just a sapling last year. Now it's 2 stories tall. The plants, they're remembering us. I don't." The video flickered, then abruptly cut out. A cold trickle ran down my spine. "Remembering us?" I repeated, trying for a laugh, but it caught in my throat. Just a coincidence, Mark's cracking jokes. But it wasn't funny. His face, the panic in his voice, it wasn't a joke. I called Mark back. The phone just rang, an empty, hollow sound. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. With a knot tightening in my stomach, I turned back to my laptop. A new email from Mark. Subject, "Sorry, Evie." I clicked it open. It was a photo, zoomed in tight, of a flower on my office windowsill. A pale pink petunia. It looked perfectly ordinary. Pristine. I squinted. I was sure, absolutely sure, I'd placed a small, vibrant red hibiscus pot there this morning. This wasn't it. This flower was too perfect. No blemish, no sign of the slight droop my hibiscus had developed. "Must have put it somewhere else," I muttered, fumbling through my own internal filing system. But the vague unease, it was no longer vague. It was a low thrum under my skin. Then the urgent call from the lab came. It wasn't a calm academic summons. It was an outright demand. I raced back, my heart already hammering an irregular rhythm. They pulled up the latest satellite imagery on the huge screen. My breath hitched. The images showed the city's outskirts, the familiar grid of roads and houses. But now,
Colossal green patches were spreading, dissolving the edges of everything. They weren't just overgrowing the roads, no. The roads, the houses, the concrete structures, they were being systematically taken apart. Thick vines, thick as anaconda, had bored into the asphalt, cracking it open. Buildings weren't just covered. Their very materials, concrete, steel, glass, seemed to be yielding, transforming, dissolving into a kind of nutrient-rich sludge that the expanding green consumed. "Not plants," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the suddenly quiet room.
The other scientists, pale and wide-eyed, just stared. This is something else. I spun around, grabbing my keys, stumbling out to the parking garage. I slid into my car, jamming the key into the ignition, my hands shaking. "No, this isn't happening," I yelled, though again, no one was there. "This is a hallucination, all of it." I sped through the emptying streets, my usual route home to my quiet apartment, now a blur of fear. But my vehicle was brought to a sudden, jarring halt. Before me, a colossal mass of vines, thick and interwoven, had formed a living wall, blocking the entire street. It pulsed with a subtle, internal light, like a monstrous heart. Standing in the middle of the road, facing the advancing forest, was a figure. It was Jim, my neighbor Jim, the one who always tended his rose bushes and complained about my untidy hedges. He was just standing there, unmoving, watching the green tide roll in. His eyes, they were wide open, but they were empty. And on his face, a smile, broad and unnatural, stretching his lips taut. It was a smile that was calm, too calm, sickeningly so. And from the corner of his mouth, just barely visible, a tiny green sprout, a little shoot pushing its way through his skin. "Jim!" I screamed, pounding on the horn. My voice was hoarse. "Come on, run!" Jim slowly turned his head. That smile remained, fixed and unblinking. It wasn't his smile. It couldn't be. His gaze drifted past me, past my terrified face, and settled on the overgrown rosebush by the roadside. "Welcome home," he said. The voice was flat, even, devoid of any feeling I'd ever associated with Jim. He didn't look at me again. He just kept staring at the rosebush, the smile never wavering. Jim slowly extended a hand, that broad, calm smile still on his face. His fingers, calloused from years of gardening, reached out to touch the rosebush. As his fingertips brushed the leaves, they began to change. Not subtly. Right before my eyes, they elongated, flattened, the skin turning from pasty white to a mottled, sickly green. They weren't fingers anymore. They were fusing, melting, becoming part of the plant. His skin started to take on the rough, textured look of bark, and the remaining flesh of his hand became covered in a fine emerald moss. "Jim, what's happening to you?" I whispered, horror locking me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All he did was repeat, in that same emotionless monotone, "Welcome home." His face, oh God, his face was already transforming, slowly being replaced by a network of moss and tiny budding branches. At that exact moment, I felt something, a faint pressure. It was coming from behind my seat. I looked down. Tiny, impossibly thin vines, like threads of dark green silk, had snaked their way up through the floorboards of my car. They were incredibly delicate, almost invisible against the dark carpet, but they were there. And now, as if sensing my attention, they tightened, ever so slightly, around my left wrist. A gentle but firm embrace. I gasped, a small choked sound.
Without thinking, I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching against the asphalt. I floored the accelerator, abandoning any thought of navigating around the vine wall. I just needed to be away, away from Jim, away from that creeping green horror. But even as the car screeched backward away from the scene, the words, "Welcome home," echoed in my mind, clear as if he'd spoken them right next to my ear. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Jim, my Jim, was gone. My car bucked, then lurched, and finally, with a groan that seemed too human, it died. The engine sputtered into silence. I tried the ignition again, twisting the key wildly. Nothing, just a hollow click. I looked down at the dashboard, my breath catching in my throat. A cluster of fine, hair-thin vines had woven their way through the air vents, curling around the ignition key, holding it fast. I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw him. Jim, or what used to be Jim. He was now fully transformed, his body a living tapestry of moss and branches, standing in the middle of the vine-choked road. His hand, now a gnarled branch, lifted slowly, in what looked unsettlingly like a farewell wave. And that mossy, cold smile remained, imprinted on a face that was no longer human. I stared, paralyzed, but then the momentum of my own terror took over. "Get out."
Now, I screamed at myself, fumbling with the door handle. My group, a motley crew of terrified survivors I'd somehow collected from the fleeing city, were already pouring out of their own vehicles, some still sputtering, others already silent victims of the same creeping invasion. They were a handful of lab assistants, a security guard, and a bewildered truck driver named Saul. We scrambled, not knowing where to go, just knowing we had to get clear of the immediate threat. The city, minutes ago a symbol of civilization, was now a feeding ground. Skyscrapers were draped in emerald shrouds, their windows like sunken eyes peering out from beneath dense, flowering foliage. The roar of collapsing concrete mixed with the unsettling rustle of fast-growing vegetation. Structures weren't just being covered, they were being actively disassembled. Walls crumbled, absorbed into the ever-expanding green. Mycothropes, like Jim, were everywhere now, their numbers swelling. They moved with an unsettling grace, their faces frozen in that same unnerving, serene smile, their movements precise, purposeful. I saw one, a woman I vaguely recognized from the municipal office, calmly directing a thick tendril to snap a power line. They weren't just victims, they were collaborators. "Run! Get to the tree line!" Saul yelled, his voice rough with panic. He was a big man, but his eyes were wide with a terror that made him look small. He pointed towards the forest, which was rapidly consuming the last vestiges of the suburban park. We ran, our footsteps heavy, lab coats flapping, minds reeling. The ground beneath us was soft, yielding, already being reclaimed. Tiny chutes pushing up through the asphalt. The air grew thick, humid, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something sweet, cloying, like overripe rot. We burst into what was once a patch of urban forest, now a dense, pulsing wall of green. Vines, thicker than my arm, snaked across the path, grabbing at our ankles. We chopped at them with anything we could find. A rusty machete one of the lab assistants had brought, a tire iron, even just bare hands. Then a low rumble vibrated through the ground. The air grew heavy. Ahead of us, the trees parted slightly, not in a clearing, but revealing something in their midst.
It was immense. A god tree, as they were calling these things now. A colossal, ancient oak, but utterly transformed. Its trunk was wider than a small house, scarred and twisted. Its bark like an ancient, calcified brain. The branches, gnarled and thick, writhed like titanic tentacles reaching for the sky. From cracks in its bark, a faint, sickly green light pulsed, as if the tree itself was a monstrous heart beating in the deepening twilight. The very presence of it seemed to warp the space around us, making the air thick, almost metallic. "Run, faster!" one of the lab assistants, Sarah, shrieked, her voice cracking. Someone, I think it was the security guard, emptied his pistol clip into the thing. Bullets, 9mm rounds, pinged off the bark as if it were steel. Sparks flew, but they left not a scratch. The god tree didn't even flinch. Instead, with a slow, deliberate movement that was more terrifying than any sudden lunge, one of its lower branches, thick as an oil drum, extended. It plunged through the metal shell of an abandoned delivery truck nearby, tearing it from its parked position, lifting it clean off the ground as gently as a child would pick up a toy. Then it tossed the truck aside, sending it cartwheeling into a ditch. Human strength, human weapons, useless. I stared at the god tree. The green light from it wasn't just illuminating the deepening gloom. It felt heavy. It seemed to distort our vision, making the edges of the world go soft. "No, it's not just a tree," I whispered, my voice rasping. My scientific mind, the one that had always sought logic, was crumbling. "No, it's the eyes. It's the intelligence." A feeling of profound dread washed over me, a chilling understanding that this was something beyond my field, beyond human comprehension. It felt like facing something that simply didn't belong, yet now controlled every molecule of the world I knew. It was utterly, terrifyingly aware. We scrambled, pushing deeper into the choking forest, away from the immediate gaze of the god tree. Panic was a raw, acrid taste in my mouth, burning in my throat.
The ground underfoot was a treacherous carpet of roots and vines, making every step a struggle. My lungs burned with effort, each breath ragged. As I stumbled through a particularly dense thicket, trying to keep up with the others, my eyes scanned the ground frantically for a stable footing. I slid past what looked like a perfectly manicured lawn, now completely consumed by a tightly woven mat of luminous green vines. And there, amidst the emerald tangle, I saw a shimmer, a strange, metallic glint. I stopped abruptly, nearly colliding with Saul ahead of me. I pushed past him, ignoring his frantic pleas to keep moving. There, from the very heart of the vine-choked lawn, a thin, silver metal spire was slowly, steadily growing out of the earth. It wasn't a root, not a branch, not some strange mutated bloom. It was a precise, almost elegant, metallic antenna. It gleamed, strangely out of place, yet perfectly integrated, like a silver tooth in a verdant mouth. From the tip of the antenna, a barely perceptible sound emanated. Not a hum, not a buzz, a low, soft, ultrasonic frequency. My ears strained, trying to catch it, but it was just at the edge of human hearing, more felt than heard. A vibration in my bones. "It's communicating," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. A cold dread, colder than anything I'd felt before, spread through my entire body, chilling me to the marrow. "It's calling."
This wasn't just a localized terror. This wasn't one tree, one converted neighbor. This was a network, a vast, waking, horrifying intelligence. How many more of these things are there? I murmured to myself, the question hanging unanswered in the heavy, humid air. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. The air in the abandoned supermarket felt thick, not with heat or cold, just heavy, oppressive. My small group, what was left of us, Saul, Sarah, and David, huddled near a stack of canned goods. We'd pushed a few old shopping carts together, a useless barricade. I was digging through a dusty first aid kit, a relic from a houseware aisle display. Anything for a salve, a bandage. We were all scraped, bruised, running on fumes. Outside, the city was dead, or, I guess, reborn. The last whispers of human noise had faded hours ago, replaced by a constant, low rustle. A sound like a million dry leaves shifting in a wind that wasn't there. I strained my ears, trying to isolate it. Was it coming from the overgrown parking lot? From the fractured walls? Or, no, it felt closer, right here, around my feet. Just the wind, I muttered, my voice thin, almost a lie. Just the wind blowing through the broken windows. My throat was dry, so dry. I swallowed, trying to force some moisture down. A cold surge, a shiver, ran up my back, though the air inside was still and stale. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum trying to cover that persistent rustle. I told myself it was just exhaustion, the kind of trick your mind plays when it's trying to catch up with something it can't process. I turned from the first aid kit, a tube of antiseptic cream clutched in my hand. David was standing in the next aisle, near the frozen food section. He was just looking, staring at something on the floor, something small. It was a cactus, a cheap succulent, forcing its way up through a crack in the cold gray concrete. Its spines were a harsh, unnatural green. David's eyes were wide, but without recognition, just staring. And his fingers, I noticed, were twitching, a small, involuntary tremor, as if something was pulling them, manipulating them. "David, you okay?" I asked. My voice, I realized, was too loud. It broke the almost silence like glass. Saul and Sarah looked up, their faces pale in the dim light filtering through the grime-covered skylight. David slowly turned his head. His mouth stretched into what was meant to be a smile, I think, but it was all wrong. Too wide, too still. It didn't reach his eyes. More like a mask, the kind you'd see on an old forgotten doll. His head tilted a bit, a mechanical, jerky movement, a small, almost invisible twitch across his jaw. No, this wasn't David, not really. I took a step back. My stomach churned.
No, he's fine, I said, mostly to myself, my own desperate rationalization. He's just in shock. We're all in shock, right? It's been a lot. My words felt flimsy, like tissue paper in a gale. The absolute wrongness of David's smile, of his empty gaze, it screamed at me. A deep, cold dread began to solidify in the pit of my gut. David raised a hand, slowly, so slowly, as if underwater. He meant to touch my shoulder. I flinched, but he didn't quite connect. His hand hovered there for a full, horrifying second, then slowly drifted downwards. His words, when they came, were half a beat behind the movement, a strange echo. Live. Be green. And then he surged forward.
Not with anger, not with rage. It was worse. It was methodical, purposeful, like a machine following instructions. His intent wasn't to hurt me, not in the way I understood pain. It was to hold, to keep me still, to assimilate. His hands, gripping my arms, were unsettlingly strong. I could feel the thin, almost imperceptible threads of something pushing through the skin on his forearms. Like tiny, emerald hairs, coiling, fungal filaments. No, not hairs. "David, what the hell are you doing?" I screamed, struggling, trying to twist away. His grip tightened. "Connect," he said again. His voice was no longer flat. It was a bizarre symphony of his own strained vocal cords, mixed with the dry rustle of leaves and a low, deep hum. A resonant vibration that seemed to come from all around us, from the concrete, from the very air. Connect to understand. And then it began. Not from David's mouth, but from the supermarket's overhead speakers. Speakers that hadn't worked in years. A whisper. Not quite a whisper, more like a thought, vibrating directly in my skull. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A statement that somehow extracted my own deepest fears, my own scientific observations, and threw them back at me. "You understand, Evie. You always understood. Why resist?" It burrowed. It picked at my mind, at my knowledge of botany, of mycology, of the long, slow, deliberate destruction humanity had wrought upon the planet. It was showing me things I'd observed. Growth rates, spore compositions, all the anomalies I had rationalized away. "No, no, I don't understand," I yelled, my voice cracking, tears stinging my eyes. You aren't natural. You're a distortion, a mutated horror." I fought against David, against the voice in my head. My legs kicked. He was so strong, unnaturally strong. Just then, the ceiling groaned, a deep, sickening sound. Then a loud crack, echoing through the cavernous space. Dust rained down. A section of the ceiling, just above us, violently ripped open. Pieces of plaster, shattered metal, and insulation rained down. Through the gaping maw, a pale, sickly green moonlight filtered in. And in that light, I saw them. Massive vines, thicker than my thighs, covered in glowing bioluminescent moss, coiling, twisting, forming a grotesque pulsing network above us. They were alive. They were watching. David released me. His eyes, fixed on the writhing, glowing network above, were filled with a placid, terrifying reverence. He didn't see me anymore. I scrambled back, tripping over a fallen shelf, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Saul and Sarah were yelling, pulling me, trying to get me to move. David just stood there, reaching a hand, now half covered in moss and tiny sprouts, towards the ceiling. He was just another part of it. "Forget him! We have to go!" Saul roared, his voice thick with raw fear. We stumbled towards the back of the supermarket, towards a loading bay that might offer an escape. The cold air outside hit me like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the cloying warmth inside. I gasped, sucking in lungfuls of the damp, earthy scent that now permeated everything. We ran, blindly, along the outer wall of the supermarket. The ground was no longer concrete, but a soft, springy carpet of moss and tightly woven vines. Then I saw it, an old electronic billboard. It had stood near the highway entrance for years, advertising local businesses, then flickering ads for long-forgotten products. It was mostly covered now, covered by a thick layer of moss and creeping emerald tendrils. But some of the pixels, against all logic, were flickering. Randomly at first, then coalescing, forming words. Faintly, like a ghost of a message from a forgotten era.
I squinted, trying to make sense of the glowing specks. Earth is purging, I read aloud, my voice a rasp. No, I thought, it can't be. Then, with a sudden, horrifying clarity, the final word flashed, bright green, vibrant against the dying electronic canvas. Or assimilating. Purging, or assimilating. The words hit me like a physical punch. Not just uncontrolled growth. This was a plan, a cleansing, a replacement. A fear, cold and absolute, wrapped around my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. It wasn't destruction for destruction's sake. It was evolution, with a purpose, a terrifying intelligence. "We need to go, Evie. What are you looking at?" Sarah screamed, pulling at my arm. I ripped my gaze from the billboard. The chilling message burned into my retinas. My mind raced. We needed to understand. We needed to find the source. If this was intelligent, if it had a plan, then there had to be a central point, a way to know the enemy, or perhaps a way to reason with it. Though, as I thought that last bit, a humorless laugh caught in my throat. Reason with this? I found myself shoving my way into an abandoned car. A sedan, covered in a slick, green film of moss and lichen. It smelled of damp earth and stale human sweat. My desperate fingers fumbled for the keys, already in the ignition. I twisted. Nothing. Just a hollow click. I tried again, frantic. Click, click, click. This car, like everything else, was already dead. The vines, I knew. They'd already done their work. I looked into the rearview mirror. My reflection stared back, frantic, terrified. But then, for just a split second, the reflection shifted. It wasn't the moss-covered dashboard or the empty, overgrown street behind me. It was a primeval forest. Trees, massive and ancient, reaching so high their crowns disappeared into a misty, timeless sky. No human structures, just green, untouched, wild. Then, just as quickly, the image dissolved, replaced by my own fear-stricken face. I stared, my breath hitched in my throat. It was a vision, a glimpse, a chilling premonition, the world it was trying to create, a world without us. What happens when there are no more humans? I whispered, the words barely audible. The question hung in the heavy air, a profound and horrifying new understanding settling in my mind. A world without me, a world that didn't need us, maybe never had. And then a new surge of determination. I had to know. I had to see. My scientific brain, battered and broken, still yearned for understanding. I had dismissed too much, rationalized too much. This intelligence, I had to face it, head on. The Alpha God Tree. I had triangulated its general location. A deep, ancient forest preserve on the edge of the old city maps. The place where the satellite images showed the most concentrated violent growth. That was it. That was the center. My last chance. We stumbled through the choking undergrowth, our progress impossibly slow. My legs burned, my lungs ached. The forest itself was a living labyrinth, a dense wall of green that seemed to shift and reform around us. The air hummed with that low, resonant frequency I'd felt before.
Not quite sound, but a vibration in my teeth, in my bones. It felt like walking through the inside of a giant living organism. After what felt like an eternity, we broke through a final, impossibly dense thicket. And there it was, what I had been seeking, the center. Before me stretched a clearing, not a clearing exactly, but a vast expanse of exposed earth covered entirely by a colossal, glowing network of fungal mycelium. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal emerald light, illuminating the roots, which writhed and pulsed like giant veins. In the very heart of this network, rooted deep, stood the Alpha God Tree, a banyan, ancient beyond imagining, its aerial roots thick as columns, anchoring it to the earth and reaching into the sky like 100 colossal arms. Its trunk was a gnarled, scarred fortress, easily wider than any building I'd ever seen. The pale green light that had seeped from its cracks now blazed with a fierce, intelligent intensity, casting long, distorted shadows around us. And the whispers, they weren't whispers anymore. They were a torrent, a flood. Not words, but pure, raw sensation directly into my mind. Not questions, affirmations, memes, fragments of a consciousness older than language, vast beyond comprehension. Not my memories assaulted me.
Flashes of ancient forests ablaze, the roar of chainsaws echoing through virtual canyons. Rivers, once crystal clear, now thick and black with industrial waste. Mountains of plastic, towering over dead oceans. Cities, sprawling, cancerous, devouring the Earth's surface. It was all there, every cut, every burn, every single act of thoughtless destruction humanity had inflicted upon this world. I fell to my knees. The roar of guilt in my head was deafening. My own past, my own initial scientific skepticism, my own helplessness in the face of human avarice, all flooded me. "No, that's not all. We tried," I gasped, my voice thin, useless. "Some of us, we tried to protect, to mend." A new voice, not really a voice, but a presence, an absolute certainty, surged through the mycelial network and into my skull. It was cold, implacable. "You are the parasites," it stated. No inflection, just pure, unadulterated judgment. "A cancer cell. We must remove." A sharp, piercing pain flared in my head. A pressure, intense and crushing. I cried out. My vision blurred. I lifted my head, trying to force my eyes open. Standing before me, emerging from the glowing mycelial network, was Mark, my old colleague. His face, still somewhat human, was now covered in a fine layer of luminous moss. His eyes, the same wide, vacant stare I'd seen in Jim. His hand, no longer a hand, but a cluster of thick, mossy tendrils, was slowly, deliberately raising itself. And then Mark touched my forehead. A wave of intense blue-green energy pulsed from the Alpha God Tree through the mycelium and into Mark, then into me. It was not gentle. It was forceful, relentless. "Join us," murmured. His voice was a flat, shallow echo, almost drowned out by the rising hum of the fungal network. I struggled. I tried to scream. My body wouldn't obey. My muscles refused to respond. It was like I was watching from a distance as my own limbs, my own voice, became unresponsive. A chilling cold spread from the point where Mark's tendril hand touched my skin. It seeped into me,
into my bones, into my very core. I looked into his eyes, into those vacant, moss-ringed pools, and I saw it, my reflection. But it wasn't me anymore. It was a pale green outline, a faint, ghostly image of Evelyn Reed, already dissolving. Thin fungal threads were beginning to crawl up my face, tracing lines across my cheeks, my forehead. I saw what was left of me, staring, in sheer, absolute horror, as my own self, my own identity, slowly, irreversibly faded, being replaced, being assimilated. The city, what was left of it, was a vast, silent testament. Skyscrapers, once monuments to human ambition, now rose as colossal spires of living biomass. Their steel and concrete skeletons had been meticulously disassembled, absorbed, and reimagined, now draped in thick, flowering vines and iridescent mosses. Windows, once reflecting the chaotic human world, were now dark, sunken eyes peering from beneath dense emerald foliage that sculpted the very air. No trace of the old city remained, save for the blurred, organic contours of its former self, a grotesque, beautiful reinterpretation forged by the verdant consciousness. On what was once a bustling avenue, now a soft, green carpet of springy moss, a figure moved, silently, purposefully. It was me, or what used to be me, Evelyn Reed, now a mycothrope. My skin bore the subtle, mottled green hue of deep moss, and my eyes, so recently filled with panic, now held a faint, pale green glow, betraying no human thought. I stopped. I turned my head slowly, my movements precise, unhurried, towards the forgotten alley where I had once worked, once lived. I tilted my face upwards, towards the sky, and from my mouth, instead of words, a gentle, hollow rustle emerged, like the sound of a billion dry leaves shifting in unison. It mingled with the soft, persistent trickle of roots burrowing deep beneath the moss-covered road. I raised my arm. My fingers, once calloused from lab work, now bore the faint, textured pattern of bark. And from the soft earth, a slender vine, delicate as spun silk, slowly, gracefully rose. It reached towards me, coiling itself around my outstretched finger, a subtle, almost tender embrace, a welcome to the new world. A world that was a single, living, breathing entity. A world that was no longer ours. And I was now a part of it. A small, obedient cog in its vast green mechanism.
Patiently, infinitely, it continued its work, seeking out the last of the non-native elements. The replacement was complete.